Excellent. I say we get started and others can join us as they appear because we have a good amount to cover, but we also want to be sure we leave enough time for everybody in the audience to participate if they have questions. So welcome. Thank you for being here today. I am Michelle Fanzo, the Executive Director of AIA Pittsburgh, if we haven't met yet. And I'm really excited to be here today with Mike Gwin from Rothschild Doyno and Ed Massery of Ed Massery Photography. Both Ed and Mike bring extensive decades of experience in their particular areas. Not only is Mike obviously an architect, but he has been on many juries as well as chairing many juries and has particular insights from many years of being in that environment. And Ed, as many of you know, has been a photographer for 33 years and brings an extensive understanding of how images can really tell a story of your architectural project. So basically, Mike and Ed are going to do most of the talking, but we will be leaving time at the end for Q&A and conversation. If you have a question as we are talking, please feel free to put it in the chat as you think of it. If we cannot answer it immediately, we will answer it at the end. So we do ask people to mute while we are presenting. And again, please use the chat. And thanks again for being here. I'm going to turn it over to Mike Gwin.
Sure. Thanks for the introduction, Michelle, and thanks for everybody that's taken their valuable lunchtime to join us in this. We hope that we can provide a little bit of insight and have some good discussion with all of you as well to consider how to really make a successful design award submission. So we have a little bit of an overview here of what we'd like to share with you over the next hour and some space for discussion at the end of that, including what we'll call a submission overview, just some tips and tricks that we've learned over the years that can be really helpful, to a focus on the photography as a key foundation to putting together a submission. It'll walk through that. And then we're going to share two submissions, a quick run through of two award submissions that Ed and us here at our firm have worked on together in recent years. So you can kind of see how it all goes together. And then continue on with questions and answers. I think Michelle will be capturing a number of those comments in the chat, and then she'll help facilitate pulling those up for everybody. But we look forward to just talking about this together. I think one of the overarching things that would be a valuable takeaway is that while we're all looking to find ways to improve the communication of our own individual submissions, if we can all sort of learn from each other, add valuable tips and tricks that help all of us as a design community, we're all better off. We're all doing better. We're able to serve our communities better. We're able to demonstrate the value of architecture better. And so this presentation is largely about finding ways to clearly communicate all the great work that we do. So we'll start with something that we've put together over the years. Whether or not this is a recipe for success is certainly lessons learned that we've put together year after year. And a couple individuals in our office put this together, reflecting on things after a submission round with local AIA a couple years ago, and that's Kim and Nadia here in our office. As you know, that point brings up, it takes more than one individual to put together a strong submission. So that's probably one of the key points to think about, is who you're gathering as a team to put together a submission. Now, all of us come from different scale offices, right? Large offices and individual offices. And so your team may be one, or if you have the opportunity, it would be more than one. Simply with that level of getting another's perspective. We all work on these projects. They're very close to heart. And sometimes a separate independent view on what is the strength of the project can be really helpful, as well as if you have the opportunity to have others work on the project submission, different layers, just like you'd put together a project team, can be very valuable, from overall leadership to people that really know the ins and outs of the project, where all the information is, and then strong graphic support. Putting together a team is a part of this, and doing it early, right? we're here now getting ready for the submission for AIA Pittsburgh, which is due, I believe, somewhere at the end of August. Now you should get going, right? Everybody should be working on their submission. If not earlier, honestly, the best time to work on a good submission is while you're working on the project and starting to capture things during construction or earlier in the design process that you know are the strengths of the project and that you're going to want to start thinking about how to communicate them. And it's never too early to reach out to a photographer like Ed or to think about in-house photography to start mocking up that visual story. And that's probably one of the two main takeaways that I'd like everybody to have here today, is that putting together a strong narrative is key to being able to communicate the strengths of your project. That's the roadmap for the story that you're going to share in the handful of pages that you have. Historically, strong photography has been the foundation for that narrative, as what you're submitting is a visual story. So a strong narrative and putting together a strong connection to photography is really, really key to that. So what you want to do when you put together a narrative is think about how to mock that up early. You know, start laying it all out, the photographs that you have, the drawings that you have, images, diagrams that put together an overall storyline of your project that celebrates the strengths of it. And I think that's really important to think about as you do that. What kind of format are you going to put together? So clarity of the information and a clean graphic format that's consistent all the way through is really, really important. You don't want to get too designy with the submission or have it not really reflect what the project is or be distracting. So that leads me to the next big takeaway is edit. And I have to say edit at least 3 times, edit, 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 because that's really where these things get good. Once you get a narrative mocked up, the idea of less is more, or, you know, clearer information is better is really key to a jury that has a quick window of time, right? These are volunteer groups typically. They're looking to donate their evening time or maybe an afternoon to gather and look at somewhere between, depending on the size of it, 20 to 100 plus projects. And you have to get your story across quickly. And you need to know what audience you're talking to. So you need to make sure that if the submission is, let's say, AIA coat, you really need to align with the environmental qualities of your project. There's a framework for excellence in design that AIA has as well. So pay attention to those, align your submissions with the things that the organization that's hosting the submission have as their values and mission. The better that you can represent that makes the jury more interested in elevating as an excellent project, because projects that are selected are projects that represent what we value as quality work, whether it's with the AIA or whether it's with a community, Masters Builders Association, Brick Masonry Institute, another environmental organization, you name it. You want to make sure that you're aligning yourself with your audience. So those are a quick sort of run through of key takeaways that, you know, things that we've learned year after year, that those 9 or 10 points, at least, you know, say a framework of at least 10 things that you want to make sure that you're thinking about as you put together a submission. That's one that we've used as a framework here. And we have different people that work on projects. So sometimes it might be the first time that someone's working on it. So just having these fundamental elements in play has been a way for us to sort of move quickly, because all of our time is valuable. So that's a little bit of an overview of things to think about as you get started. Hopefully you're all able to get started now, or you've already started on the AIA Pittsburgh one, as it takes a while to iterate and go through a good submission. So I'm going to pause there and switch over to one of those key aspects, along with the narrative to create a good story, the photography as the foundation for a submission. So Ed Massery will take you through that next piece.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks, Michelle. Just need a moment to switch screens here. Hi, everyone. So architectural photography is obviously extremely important because in a way I look at it when I approach a job, and it relates to whether it be for an award submission or for your portfolio, it basically is the same in the sense that you're trying to relate an important project that they're basically interviewing you for, to to impress them in the way that they become interested in what you're sharing. I guess that wasn't the best way of starting it, but what I'm getting at is the imagery is that you're going to share with will help them relate to a project or relate to something that they'll never see in person. So the photography has to be as special as possible and is engaging as possible to attract their attention and keep their attention while you're showing it, whether it's a judge, a competition, or a potential client. And that's basically the approach that I take. I look for elements of a project that are interesting, that are special, that are unique to the project, and try to capitalize on those as much as possible. As Mike illustrated or mentioned earlier, we're going to use the Obringer Arts project as an illustration for both the submission as well as the photography that I did for this particular project. Now, as Mike mentioned, it's best to start the photography as early as possible. In this particular case for this project, I first visited a project in March of 2021. At that time, I got a walk through it, took my camera with me, took some test photographs, and I looked for things that were unique to the project. Obviously, the environment's unique, the building is unique, but what also I found unique was how it's designed to be very sustainable for those who live there, very communicable in the sense that where people can relate to each other, they can work together or not, and they can engage each other in different spaces throughout the building. One of the features I found very interesting and strong was that they had this roof deck up there. Now, roof decks aren't that unique today, but I felt that there was something special about this roof deck because I could not only photograph the roof deck in its context, but also show it in its environment, meaning the greater context of Braddock and how that they can be at the top of this building and just have a great experience. So what I asked them, first thing I asked is, when might there be an event up there? And they said, well, the only thing we have planned for this year is July 4th. So July 4th was the day I needed to be up there or be there to photograph it. Along with photographing the rooftop at that particular time, I also looked for other strong elements to this particular project. Obviously, the front corner of the building is an iconic view. It's featured in some black and white photographs that you see here, and I wanted to mimic that view and show how the design was carried through from the original design to the current incarnation of the project. So as you can see here, I illustrated both day and night. One of the things I felt was interesting or unique too is that when I saw this particular photograph, it made me feel that, boy, it'd be great if the street was wet. So I was hoping for to do it on a rainy evening. However, it did rain, but it didn't. It was so warm out, the water evaporated. So we ended up with a garden hose wetting down the street. As you can see in the bottom left photograph, the dust shot. That's actually, unfortunately, hose water in order to make the street look more reflective for the signage. Some of the other things I look for too is context. I think the context is really important, especially not in every project, but in this particular case, this project was had a very strong context to it. It's in a neighborhood or community that's it's struggling, and I felt that the project became like a beacon because it both with the size of the building as well as reproducing the O-ringer sign. I felt it was sort of like a lighthouse that you would find on a beach or something like that. That kind of draws people to it or keeps them from crashing into the shore. So we ended up trying a number of different times, or I did, photographing the exterior from different angles and at a couple of different nights. One of the things I wasn't able to do the 4th of July was something more of a context view, as you see in this particular bottom right-hand photograph. And that's important. So talking about context photographs, I also wanted to relate it to other things in the building in its environment. And the top right or top left one is showing some old signage from another building across the street from the O-ringer. I thought it was a good way of illustrating, its community as such. Now, context relating the building to the inside, one of the photographs that the client wanted to make, or Mike wanted to make, was one of the corner units. And we did do a corner unit, but I thought, wouldn't it be great if we photographed it with the light, the LED light, which used to be neon, glowing into one of the spaces. So this is actually one of the bottom left one is one of the last photographs we made of the space. I just felt that it tied the experience of living in this space with relationship to the brightness of the sign and how that would impact someone who actually lived there. And on the right side, we have a artist studio that's in the basement. Now there's many different stalls for the artists to work in. However, the top one was the initial photograph, and I thought, well, wouldn't it be great to do something a little bit more creative with it and show the artist, working on multiple projects and looking at different things at the same time. So over a period of about a few minutes, I had them pose in different positions, just to kind of make it seem a little bit more, kind of more invigorating, exciting kind of photograph. As you can see, they did use it as part of their, and Mike will describe this later, part of their summation. And let's see, what else I want to talk about? I want to talk about using photographs effectively, and how they relate to people. 3 of these photographs were actually cropped from much larger photographs. Here we see 3 of those photographs: the top left, top right, and bottom left. These were the original photographs, and what they did is they ended up cropping them to kind of create sort of a humanistic kind of feel to their submission. I thought that was kind of interesting. I mean, today digital photo files are so large that you can still crop them quite significantly and still end up with a very good quality photograph to work with. And I think this was a good way of showing the social interaction of the project, which I thought was important, and that's why we ended up doing a lot of these kind of humanistic kind of photographs. Incidentally, the bottom right photograph is actually the first corner unit that we had photographed, and that's when I came up with the idea of shooting it again, but at a different floor, where the neon sign, which is behind that piece of artwork that's on the wall, was so intense that would come into the space and illuminate it. As you can see here, they actually used the cropped version of it in the bottom right photograph, in the bottom right of this particular page. So I think in just kind of wrapping things up with what I have to say is that as I said in the beginning, it's all about how you can draw, whether it be the judges or potential clients, into a project while you're talking about it. If the image is relatable and has impact to it that excites them, then while you're speaking or you're presenting, they definitely will have something to look at and want to spend more time listening about what this project was about and what things they can do for you. Sorry, that's it. Thank you.
Ed, thank you. Okay, I will then bring back up the other presentation. Give us 1 second in the transition here. Thanks, Ed. It really shows that there's a lot of work that goes into the storytelling through the photos that you're capturing.
Thank you.
All right, okay. So we're going to walk through two different projects by example to show you, we often talk about things that you need to do to put together a strong submission. We actually took a step forward this time and thought it would be helpful to actually see two submissions. And these two submissions are actually very, very different. They have a very different approach on how they're put together. And that's something that needs to be thought about at the beginning of the submission. What type of a story is going to best support the type of project that you have? Sometimes a project might be very compelling on that sort of first image, and the photos can stand alone and they tell the whole story for the architecture and the place that you're creating. Sometimes there are so many things that you're doing in a work of architecture that are not on the surface, whether it's performance related or the impact that the project might have on the community, or a particular detailing quality, or a unique aspect of it that really makes it exceptional, or also if it's aligning with a particular program. These two projects that we're looking at here, while they're both housing projects, they're both very different projects. And so one is addressing a very urgent need of affordable housing and renewal and regeneration in a community, and also providing an artist-focused community as well, where you have a peer group and you can work together, that's then celebrated. And that's in the Oringer building. And the other one is on more of an individual front, sort of a private residence, and emphasizing a strong connection of the building to its natural surroundings. So very different things. So we'll walk through those two things. The imagery that Ed was talking about is really essential because these are visual presentations, right? You have a jury that's going to look at these for 10, 15 minutes. Then now that submissions are done in digital format, which used to be different, you had to hand in a book, but now a jury potentially has the opportunity to read more of your narrative, to look through and do an early round assessment of it. So they do have a little more time to look at things. So we can start to layer more information into our submissions now than we've been able to in the past. And so you'll start to see that narrative emerge more through the digital submission on projects. So I'm going to go through two projects. As we mentioned, the Oringer Arts project in Braddock, PA here in Pittsburgh. And this was a submission that was originally done for AIA Pittsburgh, that then went to PA, that then went to national. And it had success at those levels. And one of the things that helped it be very successful is, well, fundamentally, it was a very strong project, right? So you got to have a strong project to begin with. The purpose and the mission of the project has to be very clear. And the resulting outcome of it successfully accomplishing those goals and priorities needs to be understood. And in doing that, this project was able to take that through to the national level. So with the AIA program, know that your formatting that you're doing here in Pittsburgh is similar to the formatting for PA and similar to the formatting for national. What you'll find is the detailed information and the narrative and the writing increase with each one of those steps, but the framework is getting closer and closer. So while it takes a ton of time to put these together, hopefully the AIA is working in a really good direction to start to align those so that we can demonstrate the great work outside of our region too. So starting with the story, the narrative piece is the other aspect of this that we really wanted to talk about. And so you have to sort of set the stage, right? And so like you're writing a story, you're putting together a visual story or a story in words or diagrams, there's a sequence to it. So that initial, you have to grab the attention, right? So there are a lot of submissions. I think we average around 100 in Pittsburgh. What is going to help your project stand out? And so this image that was selected for the first page really captured the essence of the project and is very sort of appealing to draw in the group of jurors who want to learn more about it, right? So you got to have that sort of that hook right up front. And a clear message, simple statement of what the project purpose is can be helpful too. This is where you start to think about how words can support the narrative of the photos too. And you move through, and you kind of have to set the stage, right? Whether it's the context of a site plan or the context of history, helping the jury understand how to place this project in context to its surroundings or conditions that you're working with is very helpful. It helps orient the jury, and that's something that's missing in a lot of submissions, having gone through a number of jury sessions, you quickly spend a lot of time just trying to understand what the project is. So you have to be able to kind of explain the situation very well up front. And in this one, there was a history in the context of that specific community and the specific building and its significance in the community. That was a story to set the stage for the meaning and the value of the project. Then you take that and you work through, and then you bring in the aspect of what was this project serving? And this was hosting a vibrant community of artists in a building. And so understanding how that arts-based underpinning was part of the restoration of the building. So now it's architecture and it's the human aspect of it, putting together a strong work of architecture. And so that history sometimes shows the challenges that you're working with, of how you have to, that vibrancy of one time in the past was lost through the years, and then another goal of the project is understood, that we're bringing back that vibrancy within the community in connection to history and supporting the program, being, in this case, this was a specific narrative for this specific project, was elevating that activation with the arts programs that were housed in the building. So now we're getting into the building programming and the purpose and the function of the inside of the building, while also connecting. Ed, I forgot about that really interesting thing that you talked about, where you had to enhance the conditions by making the street more reflective. I think those are the little things that you have to do to help communicate the intent of a project. They go a long way. And then in this case, the project was even stronger when you started to think about its sort of social impact and aspects beyond the visual planning and elevational views and imagery of a building, that the building is also supporting a bigger purpose and cause. And that's something you need to celebrate and show. If that's the strength of the project, and it was on this one, it needed to be celebrated so that people could understand its value. And what you're seeing here is photos that are primarily the people, and the building is the backdrop. And that might be the case. You're seeing that movement and more in architectural submissions, where back in the day, you had the photo of a building and there were no people in it, nothing moving. It was a still image with a straight on elevation, which emphasized what that photo was focusing on. And it might have been the composition of that building design and elements, whereas there has been an increasing focus to show the impact of the work that we do and its sort of broader connectivity to things in society and our culture. And those are relevant aspects of architecture. So you want to think about how your work is touching base on bigger issues or highlighting the unique things that you're doing. And so that's why in this submission, we moved to celebrating the activity and the sense of community. And so that story needed to be told. And then to the individual living spaces, connecting that through. This is where we start to talk about some value and qualities in the repurposing of a building. How do you create strong daylight and quality of those residential spaces in a building that was largely, a solid exterior? So that is another challenge and accomplishment that the project made. So you need to, find the strengths of your project and then identify those. And you can see with this submission, there's one topic per page. So you're not overwhelming the jury. You're surrounding a certain aspect of the project and communicating it through words, diagrams, drawings, and images, putting those together for the submission. There's a continuity in how the whole thing is formatted too, that you can see from page to page, right? So that consistency is really helpful for a jury to be able to navigate through and move easily through with, we'll say, less static that can be distracting or disorienting for a reviewer. So that clarity in the graphics submission is really important all the way through, from the first page to the last page. And again, as Ed was talking about, you go out to the site with a photographer or with your team to capture the photos that can help communicate the strengths of your project. And sometimes that's capturing way more photos than you actually use in the submission, but then you mock them all up. You have a table or a layout area or a pinup wall, and you mock up what you have to work with, and you start to edit it. And you say, these are the things that actually best communicate what we're trying to explain here. In this case, it was, what are the social connections of a project? And so we took the images, and these were from Ed's images that we even cropped. You don't always have to use the full thing. You can focus in on the piece that best communicates the part of your story. And that's what we did here from Ed's photos. We cropped in just to kind of saturate, I guess, the value level of the things we were sharing, to be able to bring that story together into one page so that it didn't continue on page after page. We needed to kind of set that one situation and show what we were doing effectively in one page. So that's, another mix of images, drawings, and words to communicate that. To, demonstrating, sometimes you use photographs, just of what it is. And again, maybe showing the challenges that you overcome in a project, particularly if you're doing adaptive reuse project, showing that before, and we'll say the heroics that were accomplished to transform it into the place it is now. That's something to celebrate, right? Another unique thing. To that aspect of the unique maker qualities, in this case, to celebrate the people as the actual makers, residents of the community, and the restoration of that history and that sort of sense of purpose and meaning in the project. So you can see where the project story can go well beyond capturing the imagery of a building and really demonstrating the value of the work that you did. And so that elevates your submission to another level if the quality and the outcome can start to have multiple effects and have value beyond the architecture, the community, in this case, maker opportunities, so many different things. And so you need to think about what are the unique qualities of your project that you want to celebrate, and move people through that conversation to an ending node, right? And then just like the first page has to capture your attention, the last page has to leave you with a put it all back together moment and a memory of the project, oriented often to, what was the main purpose again of the project. And so you'll have this kind of bookend of something unique at the beginning, mapping out the story of what's unique and high quality in your project. Make sure you edit that down to, this is the hard thing. You often want to show too much. Really boil that down to what's essential to communicate and what's the best aspects of your project. You don't have to communicate every single aspect of your project. Be selective and communicate what's most important to the outcome of your project. And that is the Oranger submission. We're happy to share that as a framework. This was a one-of-a-kind project. It's one that is not an idea to replicate it or anything else. It was a unique way of telling a unique story. And so that's what you want to remember, to think about what is your unique story and how do you need to tell that. So that was one project. And then I'll show you a second project that is a very different approach. And Ed, if you had any comments you wanted to add on the first one, go ahead, or we can go through this one and then add in some other comments at the end too, as we get to the question and answer session.
Let's just keep going forward.
Okay, great. So a very different project, a very different approach, to kind of emphasize that point that every project is different and you want to think about what's unique. And in this case, there's also layered in something else too, of the timing of that photography there that Ed was talking about. The submissions for AIA go in August. We started planning the presentation of this project in the fall. And that included going out to the site and walking around with Ed, in this case, to find the story, to find the areas of the building that were able to best communicate what the intent was. And then we also found that you had to do that in different times. So we had photos in the winter, the spring, and the summer that were all used in the presentation because they captured different stories. And that was particularly helpful for this example, where demonstrating the strong human nature relationship and connection to the surrounding and the natural conditions was as important as the building itself. And so that strong relationship had to be communicated. And in this case, the winter photography was a really nice way to help communicate that. And you also see the extra thing that Ed did is then he takes the timing of it, a particular time of day when a building can glow, and you see the inside come through. So now you're able to communicate more about the project because you're able to start to show both the outside conditions and the inside conditions in the same image. And that can actually add meaning and understanding for the viewer. They can kind of see those relationships. So a very different approach than the last one, where this one is, or has fewer things on a page. And so this is a different way that you can go about it, where you, in this case, you simply have a site diagram that places the building within its context, relates it to the environmental conditions, and shows you just a very clean image of that outcome of the project and its surroundings. And so both with the site and an image showing enough context, you can get an idea of the situation of the place that the project is located. That's really helpful up front for a jury to kind of know where and what you're doing. So that site plan and context image can be really helpful. Then a good clean diagram of the floor plan. Sometimes I've seen whole pages that are simply the floor plan, and if you can navigate through that and understand the pieces, a floor plan can be really helpful to a project. And in this case, the floor plan was used to emphasize the sequence of movement from the entry sequence to a moment of arrival and release into the natural surroundings. So that diagram, the plan, was reinforced with some notes and comments to explain the value and the purpose of the plan. So you kind of do plan/diagram. Then again, in a simple sort of straightforward approach, this was a singular image page. This again is an Ed Massery image, and this was done in the spring, and we had to do this. We had to think months ahead. When is the best time that the leaves aren't too full yet and I can still see the building? So we knew back in the fall that we needed to return to the site in somewhere at the end of April, early May, to be able to capture that building. So we had to plan ahead again for that to show it in a different context. Sometimes it's very helpful in your submission to move beyond planning, drawing, site plans and floor plans or images, and start to create diagrams that can provide another level of understanding. In this case, the strong environmental conditions were really important. So the diagrams were essential to be able to communicate systems like rainwater and ventilation as the driver for your design. So these type of system diagrams or section diagrams can be really valuable in your presentation to further communicate what you're trying to do. And so this was a page that summarized some of the sustainable design aspects of this specific project. And then moving to the interior, these were photos that were done then in the summer when the leaves on the trees, like fully, emerged. And then it just shows that strong relationship of the interior environment to the windows, which the windows really became the artwork and the canvas and the character of the interior, and that was nature. So just really trying to emphasize a singular point. The idea of living within nature was the driving force of the project. So you want to sort of be clear on the message that you communicate and show that in more than one way to show the consistency of that message through different areas of the project. Again, it was relying more on the images to communicate it than the words and the diagrams at this point. But this is another approach that's very effective too. Creating that drama, and that kind of appeal throughout the submission is good. We talked about that at the beginning. If you can hold that attention through it or bring it back, if you go into detail in the submission and bring it back with something that's like, whoa, what's that? And then once you have the attention, then you can use your drawings or support that narrative even more to talk about how that is a result of creating that sort of sequenced entry and release and using the site to accomplish it. So again, sort of a simple, I say simple, seemingly simple image, key sort of message and section to tie it all together was pretty effective. And then a strong ending note back out to, okay, I get it. I can kind of understand the planning of the building, the spaces, the relationship to the site. And this is the ending note memory that people would have in this submission. So you can kind of see how there's a very different approach than the other one. Both are valid, and there's 1,000 different approaches in between those that also work. But you have to be consistent with your message, edit it as much as you can to boil it down to the main sort of valuable points that can clearly be understood by a jury quickly, and that they can build consensus around it in conversations to elevate it as an excellent work of architecture that, you know, represents what the program or the criteria was trying to accomplish. So those are the two examples that we wanted to provide. I'm going to switch back to our overall sort of summary here. And in the last 15 minutes or so, we'd like to open this up to comments. Part of those comments can be expanding upon the jury process. Michelle's had particular insight to that. But in any case, we'd like to hope that these examples and some of the details we talked about can give you something to work with as you're putting together submissions. And I think that maybe the last message to say before we open this up is that if you found yourself submitting and not winning an award, it might be that you understand the value and the strength of your project. It's simply not being communicated well to a jury that has a limited amount of time. So that's why we focused on the visual impact of the story and creating a strong narrative today for you, because those two things alone can really help you hold the attention and communicate what you know is exceptional work. But the important thing is you need to get others to know that it was exceptional work. So I'll stop there and hand it over to Ed and Michelle, or open it up for comment.
I'm happy to share it really quickly, and please, folks, put your any questions in the chat. A couple things I've seen observing juries, but even before we get to the jury, right? You submit your projects to us at AIA Pittsburgh, right? So some of the things we see are incomplete submissions, which is pretty easy to avoid if you just read the requirements. And then before you hit the send button, right, just make sure they're all there. And we often think we see incomplete submissions because of my second point, which is rushed submissions, meaning not leaving enough time. Things in life in general take more time than we all they're going to take, right? Just in general. And then add the layer of what we're talking about here today, which is really presenting your work in the best possible light that you can. It's going to take time, right? And the more time you leave it, generally, the better the submission. One of the things starting early allows you, and I really encourage people to do this, and you don't have time when you're doing it at midnight, right, on the day it's due, is get your, like, what you think is pretty much a final version and share it with somebody who doesn't know the project. So that probably means nobody in your firm, right? Some friend, family member, and ask them what they got out of it, because a fresh set of eyes with no background will give you incredibly good feedback on what's really strong and coming across, and maybe what they missed, which you thought was a really important and obvious point. So allow yourself time to actually step away from the project, let somebody see it, get some feedback, and then do your very final edits. With juries, we have had, in the last, I'd say 6 years, the largest number of submissions was, I think, 106. So imagine you're on a jury of like 4 to 5 people, and you're confronted with these 106 packets of information, right, that you need to assess. So it's a lot. Generally, what happens, and every jury is slightly different, is there's a first cut round, which happens often on a different day. And then they convene to judge, those who made the first cut. And I speak in very general terms because everything is subjective and everything happens slightly differently every year. But a first cut will often leave 50% of the submissions to be more deeply judged. So what Mike said about your first impression, super important. If your jury is doing a first cut and they don't really begin to understand your project until slide 7 or 8, and they're looking at 100 of them, they may not be able to take in the value, right, fast enough for that to get what it needs to make it to the next round. First impressions are always the strongest. Your last slide is your second strongest memory in people's minds, first and last. And this is just a neuroscience research thing, right? This is because there's so much that we're constantly taking in. The strongest impressions are our first and our last. And I just want to reiterate something Mike said, because I see this. And when I observe a jury, I can't say anything, right? I'm observing to make sure that it's a fair jury and that it's being juried properly, right? But I can't talk about any of the projects or any of the firms. And I have seen incredibly great projects be misunderstood because there was no sense of a before photo or what the scope of the work on a renovation was. I have heard juries searching to try to figure out, so what did they do of what we're looking at? Like, did they do all of it? Did they do some of it? And when they can't figure that out, they have to take the whole project out of the running because they don't know what they're jurying, right? So be really clear about what it is that was done. And if it's an adaptive reuse, like that historic photo of Oringer is a great example, but also kind of the more, 2010 photo of like, here's what it was, here's kind of where it was left, and now here's where it is today, right? Those images are incredibly strong. Where you can use an image, a diagram, a graphic, rather than text, I encourage that. Again, because the jury's taking things in quickly. Images give you good images, and diagrams explain so much more than reading. Do not, please do not put a slide in there that is all tiny little text. They will never get to read it, right? Find another way to get it across. You can have text, but an entire slide, and I've seen it, of like paragraphs of text is just too hard for people. Okay.
Very good point.
Right. And it's just, I know that you're saying incredibly important things, but we think not as an architect when you put together the submission, think as a juror, think as the person receiving your message, and make it easy for them to understand. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I really want to touch on. If you love your project and it didn't win an award, resubmit it. Every year the jury's different. Every year, right? We move the jury around. So what one group might not have seen, the next group might have seen.
That's an excellent point, Michelle. And often that second go around when you resubmit, while you have a completely different jury, so different perspective, different individuals, you also have a chance to make it better, right? That pause from one year to the next, you look at it again and you do a better job of editing your own submission. So sometimes that second round, your own presentation can get better too.
So I'm going to stop there. We do have a question from HDG, which was about the unbuilt category. Would you have any recommendations for capturing the project, right, that doesn't yet have real images, as in a built image? What do you guys think?
Just one thought on that is that renderings can communicate a lot too. So, a rendering or an image or a sketch of what it might be like when it's built, that works very well. I've done that in submissions in the past, and even one that was a built project where I used a rendering, and you could tell it wasn't a built project, but it was a rendering of it to introduce the project and then move to the finished built work and show the relationship. So renderings and images can communicate, and collaging of context and the situation can also do that. So, yeah. I think I see the question down below about recognizing, you know, a partnering relationship. And
Mm.
I think, you know, this is a moment where you celebrate your team, you know, celebrating the team that's within your office or the team that you're putting together, and just being transparent about that and recognizing, you know, the roles of individuals on the project. Ultimately, there's one that's, you know, submitting the project, and the architect of record, you know, that's kind of the primary submitter for a project. But, you know, recognizing your other team members is just, you know, a great thing to do to celebrate the work of everybody. Just don't write it on the submission pages, though. You can't have any indication of your team on the pages.
Maybe one other thing that might help, like sometimes people have said to me, and this is true with like anything that you submit, right? Where do I start? Like, how do I start this narrative? A tool that you can use is the AIA's framework for design excellence, right? You can actually take those 10 elements that they offer and literally repeat it as your framework for however many of those elements you feel like your project speaks to. We often encourage that. But if you actually look at the website, AIA National's framework for design excellence, under each topic, there's an explanation, but then there's like questions, like how does this project support a healthy ecosystem? How does this project support social interaction, right? And you can start to use those questions and figure out which ones speak to your project, right? And then build your narrative off of what Mike was saying, your strongest elements. So that's one way to kind of get your juices flowing, is just look at those elements and the questions associated with them. Because again, if you're applying for an AIA award, the framework is certainly, you know, well known by the jurors too. So they will understand your responses to those elements really clearly.
To your point, Michelle, Mike made a good point earlier, and that was what they do is they create a mock-up on a board. They hang, you know, printouts of photographs, renderings, things like that, and start looking at as an overall picture, and then start thinking in your terms as to, you know, if you've never seen this project before, what two things? What's the strongest things we want to convey, and how are we going to convey that to someone who's never going to see this particular project in person? And once you can narrow that vision down, then you can do the refining parts to your actual submission after that.
Any other questions or comments? One other thing to keep in mind, and I know this is not going to be top of mind because I've seen it. Our jury moves around. Our board is usually the president is the one who selects the city that we approach to see if they would be willing to jury. The same thing happens to us very often. AIA Pittsburgh is a jury for another city. I'm trying to think. So sometimes other chapters have very different typologies of architecture than maybe what you get in Pittsburgh or maybe what you get in the Northeast. So particularly around industrial buildings and reuse. So if you go further west, they don't have generally, I'm speaking in general terms, as many adaptive reuse of older industrial buildings. So be sure if that's the type of project that you're showing, that again, it's really clear what it was and what it is today. If it was an old industrial building, or if you were intentionally trying to maintain a certain amount of industrial heritage or any kind of cultural heritage to our region, be sure to say that, because it's not always understood by people in other places the way like somebody from Western Pennsylvania would just get it. You know what I mean?
You know, I've observed over the last 20 years of award programs that the city that judges, where the judges come from, does impact how they perceive different projects, just as Michelle explained. If I remember one time we had San Francisco judge about 14 years ago, and I looked at the projects they selected, and it wasn't, they weren't as interested in projects that we do in Pittsburgh a lot of, like Michelle mentioned, the reuse buildings, things like that. They tend to have much grandiose projects that they're doing that have, people that have money that, we just don't see project wise here in Pittsburgh. So just something I've observed, and I thought that might be useful to thinking about the judge, where the juror is coming from.
Yeah.
Actually, go ahead, Mike.
You both made me think of something else too. While we're focused on the AIA Pittsburgh submission, you put a lot of effort into, doing a submission. There might be other programs, other design awards programs out there that are more particular to your type of project. We have a great range of categories and scale and, different things we're looking for in the AIA program. There might be another program outside of the AIA, or even within AIA National. There are so many subset categories that might better align with your project. So it takes a little work to kind of, dig around and find those, but they're out there. There are a lot of different submissions that you might find a better alignment with the, type of project that you're doing. So something to think about.
Something Ed said made me want to share this with everybody. One of the very small changes we made to design award submissions this year was adding a question about your per square footage cost for the project. You can opt not to answer that if your client doesn't want it, or for some reason you don't want to share that information, but we encourage it mainly to help give the jury context. Because when you do have a jury from a really big city like a New York or a San Francisco, generally their per square footage costs for across the board projects are much higher than ours. And so if they don't understand the constraint of your budget, then they're not being given the full context of your challenge and what you achieved.
Yeah, that's a good point. In general, just being able to demonstrate what those constraints or challenges were in the project that you overcame, that can help celebrate, the great accomplishment that you made. And so working with a small budget could be one of those that you want to celebrate. You did a lot with a little. That could be something to really honor. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I have actually a question. Are the judges, are they known who they are, like per name? So
no. So I can, we do not announce the names of the judges until the judging is complete.
Okay.
But we will announce the name of the city before that, but just not the individuals.
Yeah, I was just thinking, if that was something that they were able to see, they could actually research their background and get a better sense as to approach the visual approach they may take when they're reviewing projects. Because I always try to get into a client's mind as to where they're coming from and understand what's important to them, so that I can actually talk to their points rather than just kind of talk about myself.
Nice. Well, we're at 1 o'clock. I just want to make sure I took a moment to wish each and every one of you good luck as you you put the time and the energy into your submissions, and I hope you have success.
So I also wish everyone great success. If you have additional questions that you didn't have time today or didn't think of today, please reach out to AIA Pittsburgh. We are here to help you. So if there's anything else beyond this that we can help you with, please let us know prior to the deadline. And the deadline, just reiterating, is August, I believe, 27th. So once again, thank you everybody for being here. We will be posting the recording of today's session on our website and in Columns, the weekly newsletter. So you can share it maybe with additional colleagues if they weren't able to make it today. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you all.